Hello, good morning, good night, depending on where in the world you are joining us from for this webinar on what to expect during your interview process. My name is Ann Rose Johnson Lewis. I am the Director of Legal Services here at Worldwide Health Staff Solutions. And today we're just going to go over some key pointers with embassy interviews, what to expect, and how to prepare for your interview. So, of course, in your immigration journey, this is the a letter or the notification that everybody wants and everybody thrives to see that notice. And probably about after a year or so within this journey, you will get that notification from the respective embassy that you will be doing your interview, letting you know that your interview has been scheduled for your non immigrant visa. Of course, when that information is received, your case manager will work with you to prepare whatever documentation that you may need from our side in order to prepare for that interview. The interview dates are set primarily by the local embassy. Some embassies do allow you or the applicant to do so, schedule your own embassy. I believe right now the Philippines embassy is probably the only one that does allow candidates to schedule their own interview. But for the most part, embassies around the world for non immigrant visas will schedule that interview appointment for you. The interviews, of course, are affected by a number of factors why there's a delay. Of course, number one, the key thing that will determine when your interview is scheduled will be your priority date. Okay, and many of you or know understand what that means. That is essentially the date that your application was filed, and the date your application was filed, not only filed but also accepted by USCIS, and that will, of course, determine your priority date. Another factor, of course, is your particular visa type that you're trying to achieve or obtain from the embassy, and of course, the volume that is affecting a lot of embassies around the world based on the number of applications that are in queue or the number of applications that are in process. So those are some of the issues that may affect the timeline with regards to when your actual interview is scheduled. Of course, all of that happens after your petition has been documentally qualified by the embassy, and that term is sometimes referred to as being DQ'd. Okay. So that is the issue with, how would you get your embassy interview scheduled? Some other questions that you may have is what can I expect during my interview? Unlike certain different types of visa types, your EB3 visa is an employment based visa. Essentially, what that means is most, if not all, of the information that the examiner would need from your employer, who is your petitioner, is already provided and already known to the examiner. So at that point, the examiner will be reviewing the information that you, the applicant, inputted in your DS-260. And of course, whatever documentation that you were required to provide, okay, in the form of your criminal background check, your medical examination, of course, is one of those things that you would be required to provide, and original documentation such as your passport, birth certificate. At this stage, it is very important that you read the notice that was given to you and bring all the appropriate documentation that is required. Okay. The one documentation that you will be needed from your case manager at this stage is something that is referred to as a reconfirmation letter. And that is basically confirming to the officer that your job with the employer that petitioned for you is still open and available, and you still have a bona fide job offer in the US with that particular employer. Questions around your employer is not going to be too detailed. They may just want to confirm from you uh, for instance, what occupation are you going to be working in? Registered nurse, medical lab technologist, or nursing assistant. And they would maybe ask you a question about where in the US will you be working. So specifically the geographical area, the city and state where you will be working, the name of your employer, of course. Um, but they will not ask you too much details about the employer. As I said before, most of that information is already provided in the visa application that was filed. So at this stage, the examiner is mostly interested in you, the applicant, to determine if there's any factors that could be deemed what they called inadmissible, right? And that would mean that your visa would not be approved. Okay, so that is at that stage. That is what the examiner is most interested in. Not so much information about your employer, but information about you, the applicant. So it is very important that you bring all the documentation that is required from you. The one thing that we're trying to avoid at this stage is a continuation of your interview, meaning you will receive requests for additional documents. Sometimes we're commonly referred to as 221G. And that is where the examiner is requesting some additional information from you, the applicant, in order to proceed with the visa petition and actually would eventually approve your application, right? So what we don't want at this stage is for your application to be denied because you're ineligible. Those issues should have been vetted out prior to the application being filed. But of course, if something was not disclosed and then it comes up at the embassy interview, then that would be a reason for a 221G to be issued, where the examiner would be asking for additional information. Okay. So provided that you have brought with you all the acceptable documentation, your application is already approved, so you don't need to worry about that. And you answer those basic questions about your employer, you should not have any issues with your petition being denied or your petition being, are you receiving a 221G for additional documentation. The key here is to have your documents in an order that you could easily find them or locate them. Okay, so it's better to kind of separate your documents, like employer's documents, personal documents, and then organize them in a way that you could easily locate and find whatever documentation you may need for your interview. Additionally, there is no need for you to be nervous or anxious. Unlike certain interviews that you do have, which are the officer will be grilling you basically about certain information, and a non-immigrant visa for EB3, which is employment based, is less evasive, right? So you will not be grilled in the true sense, like certain other types of visa, like a family-based type visa, for instance. At this point, the officer is just trying to verify all the documentation that you have, and also verify that your job offer is still available. Okay, so that is basically what they're trying to ascertain at this stage, and that there aren't any information that would render you inadmissible to the United States. Okay, so barring any of those other negative factors, there isn't any reason why your application should not be approved at your interview stage. Okay, it is also important for you to know the rules and regulation about any particular embassy that you will be conducting your interview. So it's always advisable that you visit the website for the local embassy, and they usually have a section about preparing for your interview or upcoming interview. And then you could research and review those protocols so you are aware specifically of what not to bring with you to the embassy. Certain embassies may not allow you to bring a cell phone inside, for instance. So you need to know what is required and what you can and cannot bring. Certain embassies may not allow you to bring, let's say, a large duffel bag or a large backpack. So whatever it is, it's important that you read, um, find that information by visiting their website, so you have that information and that you won't be turned away because you had something that you shouldn't have brought onto the property. Okay. Practical questions again, is just be emotionally and mentally prepared. This is something I know that can be very stressful for applicants because you're almost at the end. Essentially, you could see, the light at the end of this journey, your immigration journey, and this is that one final step in that process. And the last thing that anybody wants is to show up for an embassy interview and then you get a continuation, okay, because you have not brought all your necessary documentation, okay? So it's very important that you work very closely with your case manager here, who will help you with the documentation that you will need and prepare you to whatever information that you will need to have on your side to also bring to the embassy interview. Okay? All right. So we will now open the session for any specific questions that somebody may have about this process. And I want to remind people that if you have specific question about your case, it is always advisable that you try to reach out to your case manager to help you with those specific issues that you're having. But we will entertain like broad questions in this forum that some people may have about the overall process. And I have CJ on the other line who will go through and review some of those questions. And we could get through some of those questions for you that you may have.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Andrew. So I've seen some case-specific questions, but let's go with the general questions first. So,
Yes.
okay, let's do it. So here's the first question. If I am asked to provide additional documents after my interview, how long do I have to submit them? And will this delay my visa approval?
So essentially, if you ask to provide additional documents after your interview, it's best to provide those documents as soon as possible, right? Because the longer you wait to provide those documents, the longer it will take for your visa to be approved. So the rule of thumb is every time if you have a request for information, you provide those information as soon as possible. Okay. Essentially, what will happen is your visa application is essentially paused until you respond to those questions, and then at that point, the local embassy wherever you had your interview will then review the information you provided and determine if they should approve or deny your application. So it's very important that you provide the information that is being requested as soon as possible. Now, there is not necessarily a timeline per se, right? But just bear in mind that if you don't respond in a timely fashion, then it just means you'll be waiting much longer. So we usually encourage candidates to provide the information immediately. And of course, that information is sent in electronically. So it's not you have to mail it in. So as soon as you have the information that is being required, do so. Provide it immediately to the embassy. Okay.
All right. Thanks, Andros. Next question is from Yvonne. The question is it possible to change the embassy after case complete if you are not yet current?
You definitely can change your embassy. Of course, if you're wanting to change the embassy, you have to prove residency in that country for which you're trying to change your interview for. So, for instance, either residency or if you're national of that country. Like if you're, say, for instance, you're in somewhere in the UAE and now you're going back to the Philippines and you're still waiting for your interview date and you are from the Philippines, then you, of course, could switch your embassy interview date to from embassy in the UAE to the embassy in the Philippines. You could absolutely do that, providing you could show residency or that you're a foreign national for that country. So those two things will be required, one or the other.
Okay. Next question is, are there any common reasons for delays in the embassy interview scheduling process, and how can I avoid them?
So, embassy scheduling delays. Of course, the number one reason that is a backlog, right? So, a lot of embassies around the world, they have way too many applications and not enough staff. So that is one of the major factors. Even though you may have a priority date that's current, you may have received your DQ letter and you're still waiting just for that notice. All right. So, like everything, there is a queue, meaning there's a stack of applicants ahead of you, and they will work to get everybody interviews scheduled as soon as possible. Some visa categories will take precedence over others. For instance, if there's a bunch of family based petitions like US citizen petitioning for family members, those visa application interviews will take precedence over an EB3. So, in that regard, if the embassy is backlogged with so many different visa types, they will try to prioritize certain visas over the other. But just know that you will get your interview, right? Especially if your priority date is current and you're documentary qualified, you will have your interview scheduled. Some embassies around the world are notoriously slower than others. We know that Manila embassy is pretty quick. We know that the embassy in Abu Dhabi is very slow. So it's just some of those factors that will cause a delay in your interviews being scheduled.
All right. Okay, let's proceed with the next question. So, if my priority date will be current next visa bulletin, but I'm not yet in DQ stage, will I be getting interview schedule, or it's needed to be DQ'd first?
You have to be DQ'd first before you will get your interview date scheduled. Okay. What that means is the NVC has received all the preliminary documentation from you that is required, and they have reviewed those documentation and they have accepted them. So if you are not documentarily qualified, then you will not receive your interview schedule.
All right. And like follow up question for that, Ambrose. She said, if the latter, then what's the estimated number of weeks or months for me to have interview schedule, like after DQ'd?
That entirely depends on the embassy that you will be interviewing with. Okay. So the first would be the embassy that you will be interviewing with, and then, of course, your priority date that you have. And then it also depends on the total number of applicants that is being processed at that embassy. So all those factors will play into when you will have or how soon you will receive your interview letter. There is not a specific guideline or estimated timeline for the embassy to say, okay, so if somebody is DQ'd for 6 months, you must give them an interview. Unfortunately, that's not the way it works. They still have a process, and everybody that's in queued is addressed based on that specific timeline.
All right, thank you. So we're done with our last two questions. So for any case specific questions, you can always reach out to your case manager and ask them, and they will be more than happy to, answer all your questions. So here's the question: are there any specific red flags or mistakes that could lead to a visa denial during my embassy interview?
So, one of the things that will definitely lead to a visa denial is non disclosure of certain information that would make that person inadmissible. For instance, if that person had a prior criminal record, or if that person was removed or deported from the United States prior, if that person has what is referred to as a communicable disease. Those are certain things. So, there's a specific regulation that it outlines all the things that will make somebody's visa application denied, and that is under 245I of the INS statute. So that will lay out all the reasons why a visa would be denied, and that is if you are deemed to be inadmissible for any of those factors that is laid out. So it's very important that you are forthcoming with any information that you think may cause your application to be denied, and disclose that information to the case manager. Okay, so your case manager could then reach out to our internal legal team to make a decision if to determine if any of those factors will result in your visa application to be denied. There is nothing more disheartening than you going to your interview and then at the end of it you hear those dreaded words, your application is denied. Okay, so if there's anybody on this call, if there's anything that you think may result in that, then it's best to disclose that information ahead of time to your case manager so we could review that and then give you information and let you know if those factors will result in your application being denied or not.
All right. So here's our last question, Anne Rose. How can
Okay.
I check the status of my visa after the interview, and how long should I expect to wait for a final decision?
Unfortunately, there's not a status option on a local embassy's website. If you go on the portal, the SEAC portal, it will just tell you either you're in administrative processing or your case is on being reviewed or your case is approved. So there's no way for you to get a specific information. You'll just get those general notifications. And as of right now, the embassies around the world, they don't do that. That's not a feature that's offered. So after your interview, right, and there's no 221G that was issued, meaning there's no additional information that was requested. At that point, you should receive your visa relatively soon. Okay. And most of these embassy will, at the time of your interview, hold on to the passport so they could input the actual visa inside your passport. So if there isn't a request for additional information from you and everything was provided at the time of your interview, depending on where you are, you should receive your passport with your visa within a number of weeks. Okay, there are of course unusual circumstances where it takes longer. That is something that is not typical. So if you have had your embassy interview and you weren't required to provide additional information, and for instance, it's now 90 days later and you have not received your visa, your passport back with your visa, then something is not right. So, in that regard, please reach out to your case manager so they could reach out to our internal legal team to reach out to the embassy on your behalf to figure out what's going on, because that is not normal. Because if you have everything is fine, no additional documentation is needed, you should receive the visa back through the courier service within a number of weeks. It should not take months, if that makes sense.
Correct. So as far as I remember, when we were approved, when we were on
Hmm.
the stage, it was like just after a week.
Yeah, it's
Um,
number of weeks. Yeah,
yeah,
it shouldn't take
correct,
months for you to get that back.
correct.
As long as your
Mm.
visa is approved, it will take weeks for you to get your passport back, not months.
All right, correct. Okay,
Okay?
so that's with our Q&A session. And also, I've seen here and Rose like
Yeah,
question, what happens at the interview and what type of things do they ask? I just want to share my experience. So with
yeah,
like we've been through the process. So we were really so anxious with the embassy interview. So it took us only like 10 minutes on the whole process. So
yes,
like it took us like most of the time preparing the documents in front of the like window.
yeah,
So we prepared all the documents, show them all like the required documents, and it will be like in the checklist that will be sent out to you and
Yes.
when you're already in this process. And then like it took us only 5 minutes for the like interview, like they are asking questions like based on all the documents. Like for my wife, they
Exactly.
asked,
Yep.
where are you working, and like
Hmm.
who's your recruiter, something like that. So
Yep.
it's not really like we're thinking the worst, but it's really like a smooth process.
Yes,
Yep.
for the EB3, and thank you for sharing your personal experience, CJ, because there's nothing like somebody who has gone through this process who could explain it better to
Mm.
people who are about to go through this process.
Uh-huh.
I've not had that experience. I could just basically tell you how this should work. So thank you
Mm.
for sharing your personal experience with that. But obviously, this interview will not take hours, right? It takes
Yeah.
less than 30 minutes. Less
Yeah,
than 30
correct.
minutes. Yeah. The preparation is longer, right, for the
Hmm.
interview, but the actual interview itself will not take more, it should not, I should say, should not take more than 30 minutes. There's no reason for the officer to get within deep details or information. Everything that they'll be asking you will be surrounding you personally with the documentation you have and your employer, where you're going to be working, what kind of work you're going to be doing. They may ask you, how did you find out about this job, in effort to make sure that you weren't taken advantage of, or you're not going to be taken advantage of by some scrupulous person on the other side, wherever you may end up, not necessarily the US, but anywhere in the world that you will be going. So yeah, it's a rather, the interview part is rather fast. It's the preparation that is stressful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, for real.
Yeah.
Correct. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, that's for our Q&A session. So I just want to remind to our all of our viewers that like us on Facebook for like immigration updates and new positions, and also we always have webinars weekly. So please like us and follow us on Facebook. I'll put that on the link. And also next would be our amazing program. Here are refer a nurse program. So if you have like a colleague and has an NCLEX, you can refer them to us, and you will earn up to $250. Okay, so Ambrose, any last thoughts?
Um, just I want to just say final thank you to everybody who took the time out of your day to join us wherever you are around the world. I see a lot of different countries on the chat, so I just want to thank you very much for taking the time out to spend this 30 minutes with us, and to have, hopefully I was able to answer questions that you may have had about your interview process. And naturally, if you have specific questions, please reach out to your case manager to have those questions responded to on your behalf. Okay, so again, thank you to everyone. A good night, a good